the first of our Becoming Gustav Metzger, Uncovering the Early Years, 1945 to 59 event. My name is Sarah McDougall and I'm Director of Ben-Uri. A very warm welcome to you all, and particularly to this first of our events featuring our two curators, Leanne Dimiterko and Nicola Baird of the Ben-Uri Research Unit. So we're really delighted to be reopening our doors to this exciting exhibition. That'll be the first time, of course, since the March lockdown of last year, and that will be opening at the gallery on the 16th of June, although our private view will be virtual, and that will be the evening before on the 15th of June. Full details, as ever, on our website at benuri.org. But this first event this evening features our two co-curators, Leanne and Nicola, in the following format. Nicola will present a short introduction, a teaser to the upcoming exhibition, and explain and outline the online events programme. And she will be followed by Leanne, who will discuss the work of the Gustav Metzger Foundation, its beginning, its aims, and its vision for the future. This will be followed by a Q&A, which we very much hope that you will all participate. Please note that we are recording tonight's event, so if you don't wish to be on the film, please turn your camera off and please stay on mute throughout the talk. If you would like to ask a question, then towards the end of Leanne's talk, the chat will be enabled and the questions will come straight to me, and I will then field them to our two curators. And I also just wanted to thank, as well as Leanne and Nicola this evening, the Paul Mellon Foundation, who have kindly sponsored our events programme, and we're enormously grateful to them for that. So before we begin, just a little bit about our two speakers. Leanne is a London-based curator and the co-curator and co-director of the Gustav Metzger Foundation. For nearly a decade, until his death in 2017, she collaborated closely with the artist on projects and exhibitions worldwide. These have been held at incredible locations, and she worked with him on numerous projects, including in Nice, at the Himalayas Museum in Shanghai, at the Pompidou Center, Metz, at the Serpentine Gallery in London, the New Museum in New York, Tate Britain in London, the Museo UMEX in Mexico, Documenta 13 at Kassel, MoCA at Los Angeles, Tel Aviv Museum of Art in Israel, the Haus der Kunst in Munich, the Gwangju Biennale in South Korea, the São Paulo Biennale in Brazil, and the Royal Academy of Arts London. And most recently, she's co-curated exhibitions of his work at Kabuso in Norway and West in The Hague. Nicola Baird is a research officer and curator at the Ben-Uri Research Unit, based here at Ben-Uri Gallery and Museum in London. She's currently studying for a PhD in History of Art at London South Bank University in collaboration with Ben-Uri. And as a guest curator at Berg House, Hampstead, she was the initiator of the Arts Council funded exhibition, The Making of an Englishman, Fred Ullman, a retrospective, which was held at Berg House before touring to the Hatton Gallery, Newcastle in 2018. In 2019, she curated Czech Routes to Britain, selected Czechoslovak artists in Britain from the Ben-Uri and private collections. So I will now hand over to Nicola for the first of our two presentations, and I hope you all enjoy this evening's event.
Just sharing my screen. So thank you, Sarah, for the introduction. I'd like to begin this curatorial introduction to the Becoming Gustav Metzger exhibition and events program by providing a brief biography of the artist for those of you who aren't familiar with Metzger's life and work. Gustav Metzger was born in 1926 in Nuremberg, home to the second largest Jewish community in Bavaria. Many were recent arrivals from other parts of Europe, including Metzger's parents, who had immigrated from Poland in 1918. After 1938, the situation for Jews in Nuremberg became insupportable, and beginning with the deportation of his father and sisters to Poland, Metzger's family began to disintegrate under the pressure of Nazi politics and practices. His mother voluntarily joined his father at a detention camp near the Polish-German border, while his sisters fled to Sweden, later immigrating to Israel. His parents and eldest brother perished in the years to come, as did his grandparents and many other close relatives. Metzger and his older brother Max, also known as Mendel, however, were rescued and sent to Britain as Polish citizens under the auspices of the refugee children's movement. They arrived in England along with 5 other refugee children on the 12th of January, 1939. They were initially housed in Butlins holiday camp and subsequently in a hostel for refugee children in London. In 1941, having moved to Leeds to study cabinetry, Metzger became immersed in left-wing politics, while the work and writings of Eric Gill seeded the notion of becoming an artist. Upon the advice of Henry Moore, whom he had approached offering to work as a sculptor's assistant, Metzger spent 6 months at the Cambridge School of Art before enrolling at the Sir John Cass Institute in 1946, where he studied sculpture and attended life drawing classes taught by revolutionary British artist David Bomberg at the Borough Polytechnic, alongside contemporaries including Leon Kossoff and Frank Auerbach. The following year, Metzger was encouraged by Bomberg to join his composition class, in addition to the evening live class, and in which he produced a number of extremely fast and intense paintings. Having obtained a stateless passport, he spent the summer of 1948 traveling on the continent, embarking on an art historical journey of sorts. He spent time in the Netherlands, Belgium, and France before enrolling for a year at the Antwerp Art Academy, funded by a grant from the city's Jewish community. He returned to England in 1949, resuming Bomberg's classes and having developed, in the artist's words, a real closeness with Bomberg, subsequently initiating the Borough Bottega Exhibiting Society, organizing and participating in its first exhibition at the Berkeley Galleries in 1953. After resigning later that year, Metzger stopped painting for almost 4 years. It was not until 1956, whilst living in King's Lynn, Norfolk, that he produced, among other paintings, a series of oils depicting a 3-legged table evocative of a mushroom cloud, his return to painting having coincided with his involvement in the campaign for nuclear disarmament. In 1960, he would become one of the co-founders, together with philosopher Bertrand Russell, of the anti-war protest group Committee of 100. Between 1957 and 59, Metzger increasingly embraced abstraction, experimenting with painting on cardboard, plastic, and sheets of mild steel. He described such work, which laid the foundation for his later, better-known auto-destructive art, as a continuation of that produced in Bomberg's composition classes. From these important beginnings, Metzger went on to develop the theory and practice of auto-destructive art, initially by means of painting with hydrochloric acid on sheets of nylon, and subsequently through the use of liquid crystal projections, the historic photograph series, which responded to major events and catastrophes of the 20th century, and installation-based works exploring ecological issues, globalization, and commercialization, becoming the conscience of the art world, a principled and pioneering practitioner who believed that art should have the power to influence other people and influence the world, and whose definitive contribution to British cultural and political, ecological history cannot be underestimated. Retrospectives of his work, principally from 1959 onwards, have been held at a number of major museums and galleries in the UK, including at MoMA Oxford in 1998, at the Serpentine Galleries in 2009, at Kettle's Yard Cambridge in 2014, and at Tate Britain in 2015. Metzger died at home in East London on the 1st of March 2017. And now I'd like to talk a bit about the exhibition and show you some more slides. So, Becoming Gustav Metzger, Uncovering the Early Years, 1945 to 59, which opens at Ben Uri on the 16th of June, is the first museum exhibition to exclusively examine the little-known formative years of refugee artist and activist Gustav Metzger. The sixth in Ben Uri Research Unit's survey exhibitions highlighting the important contribution of Jewish and immigrant artists to British visual culture since 1900, the exhibition will showcase rarely seen drawings and paintings from this crucial early period, the majority never previously exhibited, together with related archival material, while a more extensive offering will also be available to view online at benuri.org. The physical exhibition, although concise, will indicate the breadth of Metzger's early work on paper, canvas, and board, while the more extensive online exhibition will not only include a greater number of works on paper, but also work on cardboard, plastic, and steel. The amazing thing about this body of work is that it was only rediscovered by Metzger between 2009 and 2010, having been stored in the loft of a relative in North London since 1965. Highlights featured in the exhibition include large expressionist oils on board, Dissolution of the City, as you can see on screen now, dating from 1946, which depicts the struggle between East and West London, and which Metzger felt was influenced by Futurism, and a painting on a similar scale, completed later the same year, entitled Eroica Funeral March, depicting a movement from Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, which in the artist's own words was influenced by Kandinsky and his concern with music. Antwerp Model, 1949, also expressionist in style, was painted while Metzger was studying under Gustav de Bruyn in Antwerp, and is a work in which, as Andrew Wilson notes, a conventional seated female figure is transgressively transformed into something half animal. The thickly painted head of E. Royalton Kish, 1950, portrays the solicitor who was responsible for facilitating Metzger's grants from the Handler Trust that supported his attendance at the Sir John Cass Institute, the Borough Polytechnic, and various other art schools over a period of 3 years, and was a repeated subject for paintings and drawings. Other key works include a sequence of studies and finished paintings based on an ink drawing made in Antwerp, titled and dated Homage to a Starving Poet, 7th of April 1949, which relate to Metzger's memory, not long after he had begun attending Bomberg's classes, of having been warned by his teacher that if you want to be an artist, you must be prepared to starve. The titling and dating of such a work, as well as the number of resulting works, is suggestive of the importance that this subject had for him, as well as the impact of Bomberg's influential teaching, not only in terms of artistic practice, but also in relation to his belief that it is the example that the artist gives of fulfilling himself in his work that is of social use to others. The series of oils and drawings, often in coloured chalks, all titled Table, mark the end of Metzger's 3 years without painting. Such works might be seen to reflect Metzger's increasingly anti-nuclear sentiment, and yet about this series of paintings he has also suggested a connection to the Tablet of Moses. I was raised in a Jewish Orthodox environment, so there was a fascinating clash in my youth between art and the Jewish insistence on the prohibition of images. This is at the center of my work. On the one hand, opening up to the world, and on the other, closing off from it. I arrived in Britain as a refugee when I was 12 years old, so it never came to the point of choosing between art and tradition. And because by the time I would have been faced with such choices, I had already left my hometown and gone in a completely new direction. He has, however, also spoken in conversations with author and independent curator Brona Ferren of grappling for years with the central question, how might a Jewish person make art? As well as the ways in which he was circling Judaism with respect to making images of the human figure. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, Metzger began to introduce new methods and materials into his practice, successfully experimenting with painting using a palette knife and on alternative, often found materials, including cardboard, Kodak boxes, plastic, and sheets of mild steel collected in London. Speaking of the works on steel, Metzger has said that he came to the realization that he wanted to work with something harder, more resilient. He has referred to a particular painting on steel in oil and chalk as his last painting, saying that I didn't paint again because there I summed up my capacities and my interest in painting. And yet there are paintings executed in the early 1960s which can be dated because of the stamps on the back of the Kodak box packaging. Together, the works exhibited chart Metzger's artistic journey from figuration to abstraction between 1945 and 1959, immediately prior to the development of the radical autodestructive practice for which he is better known. The exhibition will also include contextual works drawn from the Ben-Uri collection by artists considered important early influences on Metzger, namely Bomberg, who he acknowledged was probably the biggest influence on me, Jacob Epstein, Henri Gaudier-Brejcha, and Kurt Schwitters. Works on display will therefore include Bomberg's portrait of John Rodker, Epstein's portrait busts of Jacob Kramer and Lydia, Gaudier-Brejcha's sculptural head of Brodsky, and Schwitters' collage for Frau Frenkel, as well as works by fellow pupils Kossoff and Auerbach, portrait of N.M. Sido, and head of Helen Gillespie. Tonight's curatorial introduction is the first in a series of 7 online lectures and panels, kindly supported by the Paul Mellon Centre for Studies in British Art, as Sarah mentioned, designed to complement the physical and online exhibitions and focus not just on the early years, but also on the mid and latter part of Metzger's career. The programme, which runs through until September, will be the first of its kind to be held in the UK since the artist's death in 2017, and will feature contributions by leading art historians, artists, and curators with extensive experience of collaborating with Metzger on a number of interdisciplinary projects, including Andrew Wilson, Senior Curator of Modern and Contemporary British Art and Archives at Tate Britain, who first met Metzger in the 1980s, and whose most recent exhibition of Metzger's work, Gustav Metzger Towards Autodestructive Art, 1950 to 62, was held at Tate Britain in 2015. Dr. Elizabeth Fisher, Leverhulme Research Fellow at Northumbria University, curator in 2014 of Gustav Metzger, Liftoff at Kettle's Yard, and in 2019, Gustav Metzger in King's Lynn. And Daniela Perez, independent curator of We Must Become Idealists or Die at Museo Jumex, Mexico in 2015, as well as Pontus Kayander, lecturer at the Finnish Academy of Fine Art and curator of Gustav Metzger, Act or Perish, at the Centre of Contemporary Art in Turin, also in 2015. Matthew Copeland, author of Gustav Metzger Writings 1953 to 2016, independent curator Brona Ferrin, and last but by no means least, artist Joel Joelson of the duo known as London Fieldworks. An important collaborator with Metzger on projects including Null Object, Gustav Metzger Thinks About Nothing in 2012, and the immensely influential Call to Action in Order to Remember Nature on the 4th of November 2015, which saw the artist encourage students and art practitioners around the world to make work addressing the catastrophic effects of global warming. So I really hope you'll be able to join us for all or some of those in the coming weeks and months. As you will see on screen, our next event takes place on the 12th of May, in which Karina Plath, Deputy Director of the Sprengel Museum, will discuss the publicness of Metzger's work, his early proposals for monuments, and the idea of occupying space by artists, which later is resumed in sculptural projects such as Equivalent Shattered Stones, 2007. I think that's about all from me, and I'd now like to hand over to Leanne.
Okay, thanks so much, Nicola. So yes, I'm from the Gustav Metzger Foundation, and just wanted to give you a bit of a kind of overview, because I know there's not much publicly available information about the foundation at the moment, because we're so new, really. So just to speak a bit about origins, aims, and basically what our vision is for the future. So in 2010, Gustav Metzger recovered a large body of work, which Nicola mentioned earlier. These were his paintings and drawings, many of which you will hopefully soon see in this exhibition. He kept them in storage in the attic of a relative's house since 1965. These works hadn't been seen by anyone, including Gustav himself, for 45 years. It was around that time that I think he really started to consider his legacy, how to carry on his work after he was gone. But he also really began to recognize the importance of caring for and preserving his work into the future. As you can see by his later work, Gustav was very much focused on the future in his work and in his activities, on trying to highlight and to solve the many issues faced by our society, particularly in relation to the environment, nature, and mass extinction. He wanted to ensure that his work and ideas would continue to be seen, heard, and discussed, and importantly, continue to encourage people to take action. So I think that's really when the seeds of the foundation were sown. He met with his lawyer to start the process of declaring his wishes formally, and wrote a letter to give some guidance about the way in which he wanted the foundation to operate. He also put in place at that time his recommendations for the Board of Trustees and for myself and my colleague Ulla de Gerling to run the foundation on a day-to-day basis. So in his own words, from his letter to us, I hope you will be able to organize exhibitions of my work and convey the political and philosophical ideas which I have espoused. I would like to support individuals who need support, working in the fields of the arts or environmental studies or other areas compatible with my work. But the overarching activity of the foundation should be to combat the risks of worldwide mass extinction resulting from human activities. Extinction was a focus of Gustav's work for many years and a crucial part of his practice, especially later in his life. This is what he said about it in 2010. Extinction is hardwired in the living world. What distinguishes the period since the end of World War II is that the rate and volume of extinction has become excessive and threatens the future of life. Only determined worldwide action can slow down the advancing destruction. But firstly, we need to understand what is happening. We need to create an overarching view of the most pressing issue of our time, extinction. Environmental degradation, genocide, atomic weapons, threats to small isolated communities, threats to languages, global warming, economics and extinction, catastrophes in nature, life wiped out by disease and hunger. We need to call for action. Gustav also set out a long list of other aims for the foundation, including to promote human rights, to promote racial and religious harmony, to promote the conservation, protection, and improvement of the environment, to promote sustainable development for the benefit of the public, to advance the education of the public in the arts, world ecology, and the conservation, protection, and improvement of the physical and natural world, the relief of sickness and suffering of those in need as a consequence of any change to the natural environment, among a few other things as well. Of course, we want to grow the foundation in a way that allows us to keep those rather large but fundamental aims at the core. Firstly, the foundation, although very newly established, has tried to continue to advance public understanding and appreciation of the artistic and literary work of Gustav Metzger. With exhibitions all over the world in recent years, Gustav's work has recently been shown at the Sprengel Museum in Hanover, the De Vere Gallery in Tel Aviv and Brussels, the Martin Gropius Bau in Berlin, the Punta della Dogana in Venice, and here in London at Tate Modern at the moment. You should also go check that out, just to name a few. We've hoped to encourage people to see and think about his work and the messages behind it. So even though he's gone, his voice will still be heard. We also take care of the vast collection of artwork that Gustav left behind, including the hundreds of works on paper and paintings, which we refer to as the early works, as well as later sculpture, models, and installations. We also maintain the huge number of items in the Gustav Metzger archive, which includes personal letters and ephemera, leaflets, photographs, handwritten notes, sketches, notebooks, and plenty of other items. At some point in the future, we aim for the archive to be widely accessible and available online to everyone. In terms of the future direction of the foundation, we hope to be able to further Gustav's work by developing a widespread public program that would incorporate an element of Gustav's practice that was so important to him, especially in his later years, bringing people together for discussion. Throughout his whole life, but a lot in recent years, Gustav spent much time giving lectures at art colleges, universities, and other public institutions to convey the importance of taking action to the next generation of artists and arts professionals. He also organized symposiums and conferences that would bring people together from a wide variety of disciplines. It was his belief that working together and pooling knowledge would be the best way to come up with solutions to climate change, environmental degradation, and ultimately mass extinction. By activating people from the arts and other disciplines like science, engineering, or architecture, we could make a much bigger difference. During an interview a few years ago, I asked Gustav about art's role in the struggle against extinction, and he told me, "Art's role is to support human endeavor, and it should be encouraged to do that. Without it, we are nowhere at all. Art includes every manifestation of creativity, whether it is music or words or kinetic art, and that can help, if only to calm us down and put us into a peaceful and responsive state of mind. Art is everything." The vast reservoirs of expertise locked up in the art world can contribute something positive to the fight against extinction. Knowledge and awareness, including that stimulated by art, can open up. It can trigger a sequence of responses by people throughout the world. There are huge areas where art has the opportunity to act, and that can play a role in reshaping the future. Not only can art cause change, art must cause change. So we hope to be able to open up further discussions by launching a public program of events like symposiums, lectures, and conferences in the same way Gustav did, both around the UK and worldwide. As you heard, Gustav also hoped to support those working in the fields of art and environment. And so we also aim to establish a residency program or a bursary scheme, or maybe both, who knows, for young artists working on issues of environment and ecology so they can continue their work. In the end, the intention of the foundation is, first and foremost, to preserve the work and extend the knowledge of the ideas Gustav developed over the course of more than 65 years. We want to make sure that his ideals and aims won't be forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leanne. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Thank you, Leanne. That was fascinating to hear so much more about what you do at the foundation and all those aspirations for the future, which are so important. And it's, you know, incredibly timely, this focus on the environment that Gustav had, and how that chimes in very much with concerns today. I know we've had a couple of advanced questions, and that people would like to hear, I think, a little bit more about that. What inspired specifically, if there was a specific, or was it a gradual awakening to the importance of environment and that sort of activism and the art events and happenings that he initiated around that? Could you tell us a little bit more about that, Leanne?
I guess that's kind of a lot of questions in one, or a big question.
It is. I've slightly expanded on the original, so please take whatever you would like to deal with from that large question.
I think, I mean, a lot of people who know about the history of Gustav's work and some of the proposals and kind of work he did earlier in his career, let's say in even the 60s and 70s, still had kind of ecological concerns. And so I think with a lot of other people really do believe that he was before his time in a sense. I mean, he was saying things that people are just saying, in the last few years and today, and he was opening these up as wide concerns and wished that people would listen. And so, I mean, I think probably always had it in him. He was always really in tune with nature. When he was about, I don't know, 15, 14 years old, when he started working, he was working with wood. He was a cabinet maker, furniture maker during the war. And so he liked to work with his hands, and he liked to be within nature. But he always had this connection to working with wood and trees as well. So he did express that in a talk he did in the Whitechapel Gallery. It might have been in 2011. And it was called something like My Life in Wood. So he expressed how he had this close connection to nature and trees. And so I think it was really always in him, probably from the beginning of his life, potentially because he had actually seen so much firsthand destruction of, of everything, of the environment around him, the built environment as well as the natural environment, but also his family, his whole life. So I think that uprooting caused him to want to protect and to conserve. And of course, in his later years, only more and more, I think his work began to focus on it, and it was probably the main and maybe only focus in the last years of his life. So he was, as I mentioned, he was really interested in bringing people together. We organized it with lots of other people involved, of course, conferences and symposiums. They were basically all about facing extinction. One of them was called Facing Extinction. It was a conference. And basically, I think if you look back at any of his work, you can almost find a connection to nature. So certainly I still think of him as just, well ahead of his time.
And do you think that he felt that call that he had put out was being answered? Was he sort of feeling that upcoming grassroots movement from young people in particular?
Yes, I do think somewhat, yes. I mean, I had asked him, do you even have any hope? Or, do you think we're a bit hopeless at this point? And I remember him always saying, well, sure, it looks bad, but of course I have hope. And I think one of the reasons he put in so much time and energy into particularly meeting young people, he really enjoyed meeting young people, whether he was at an opening or an event, he would always strike up conversations. And as I mentioned as well, he spent a lot of time giving lectures at art colleges, for example. And at the end, he would always be surrounded by young artists, wanting to ask questions about his work, being really encouraged and inspired by what he had to say. And I think he saw that hope there. So that was part of it. And I think that's part of why he wanted his foundation to actually continue specifically to support young people in their work, because he thought, yes, they're the next generation. They're the ones that have to take on this immense task and make that change.
Thank you. A couple of other questions coming through here. So Robert Parks would like to ask specifically about the Art and Destruction Symposium at the Africa Centre in the 60s, when he brought over the Viennese actionists. What did he view the role of performance art performed in relation to his auto-destructive work? I guess that's, how did he view the role of performance art in relation to his auto-destructive work?
I guess maybe it's kind of asking if he viewed his own auto-destructive art as performance art, I guess, as well.
Robert, are we, I can see you there on screen. Are we reading your question correctly? Do unmute yourself, Robert, if you would like to ask that directly to Leanne or to Nicola.
I think Leanne's best placed to answer that one.
Yeah, okay. Well, if you'd like to start tackling that, Leanne, and then if Robert wants to come in at the end, we'll sort out the technology so that he can do so.
I mean, I think that's obviously a pretty big question, and I'd love to be able to get back into the mind of Gustav Metzger and ask him these things, because as I told Nicola earlier, I swear every single day I wish I could just press rewind and ask all these questions that I feel like I had the opportunity to do for so many years and just didn't. But anyway, obviously, I mean, performance art was part of it, because several artists who were a crucial part of the Destruction Art Symposium did, partake in performance art as their kind of contribution. And in terms of Gustav himself and his, like, for example, his acid nylon paintings, certainly that was, in a sense, performance art, or at least related to performance art, because it was an act, and it was all about the act and the process of making. And in fact, the result of those works, the painting that resulted from spraying the acid on the nylon, weren't meant to be kept around as, a piece of art that you would hang on a wall or in a museum or anywhere. They were meant to be discarded directly afterwards, because it was about not so much maybe performing for people, but really about the act of the artist, the act of the acid itself, the act of the materials creating something different and something new, and the act of transformation in itself. So I would say, just thinking back to the Destruction Art Symposium and thinking of like the Venus Actionists as well as Yoko Ono, certainly I don't know exactly what his answer would be, but he didn't seem to discriminate, and it was crucially a big part of the Destruction Art and Symposium.
Robert, I hope that's answered your question. We don't seem to be able to unmute you. I do apologise for that. Oh, I see you are I think you are unmuted now. Did you want to come back on that? No. Sadly, you seem to be muted again. I'm so sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah, well, I knew him. He came to I had a show in the New Forest. He came to it. And I talked to him a lot about performance art. And he said, because it was the issue of the, I forgot, it's a long name. The legend was that he cut his penis off in a performance as an act of self-mutilation, because the actionists in Vienna at that time were doing very radical, and one of the others was about to take a bite out of his arm, and he thought, that's taking it too far. That's when he sort of drew back from his work. But he, I don't know, I think Gustav linked that process of defilement of the body to the process of auto, with the acid on his nylon pieces. So there was a similarity, and he saw them both as passive acts, being one of the founder members of the Committee of 100. So I think there's a tension there between something on the surface which is extremely scary, and this artist. He didn't cut his penis off, but he did commit suicide jumping through the gallery window, which was another. So the equivalent in the early 70s in performance art, in relation to what the Vietnam War and the Second World War was slow self-torture on oneself. So sort of destruction of self as a gestural art, So there, in conversation with him and that, there is a strong link between the origins of it's got become like a performing, entertaining art now. But in the early 70s. I knew Chris Bird and Barbara Smith, and they were, he similarly was engaged in sort of acts of, and the choices sorry, I'm going on. I think choices in the late 60s were either self-mutilation or sex, and I didn't go down I didn't want to cut myself, so I went into sex, and I don't know if that's of any interest to you, but.
Okay, well, thank you for taking us back to that moment in the 60s. And Leanne, I don't know if you want to comment further on that, or if we want to move to the next question.
Oh, I think that's right. It was interesting to hear from you, Robert. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Okay, so we have, I don't know the questioner's name, but the person is asking, how has storing Gustav's work for 45 years affected the job of getting his message out? So I think that's another one for you, Leanne.
Well, so the work that was stored for those 45 years was specific body of work. So it was a lot of works on paper and several hundred paintings. These works were kind of a different, well, really of a different period of Gustav's life and practice. So in a way, when he stopped painting in the early 60s, I mean, he moved on from them. So, there's an idea, I suppose, and it's not been 100% confirmed, but I think that Gustav actually put them away because he wanted to move forward. He wanted to start working with different materials, concepts, ideas, and he wanted to put that behind him in a sense. So I'm sure he knew all along that at some point he would feel it was the right moment to come back to them, and he knew they were there, but he just put it in the back, in the back of an attic, and said, okay, I will come back to you when I want to see you again, but until then, goodbye. And in fact, that's why he didn't really mention it to anybody. He was, I think, trying to close that chapter of his life for a bit. So in about 2009, when he kind of decided, okay, I'm going to go back, I'm going to reopen that chapter of my life. It was simply fascinating because, of course, he could recall some of the things he had put in there, but nobody could remember after almost 50 years what you had packed away in a box so many years before, especially when there was such a large quantity of work as well. So it was almost like opening a treasure chest. Even to him, I saw his eyes light up when he opened those boxes and rediscovered, and it just, it made him remember all of these moments in his life. So it didn't really have an impact, I think, in a sense, on the messages he was trying to get across, because he was constantly working, and he was just working in other ways, with other themes and materials, etc. But he was always working.
And it sounds as though you were actually there at this sort of moment of uncovering.
I was super lucky. Yeah, a few people were, I think maybe about a dozen people or less, but it was a fascinating moment, yes, to have all these boxes and not quite know what you're going to find when you open them, but to uncover all this work that in many ways, obviously, is so much not what people expect from Gustav Metzger, because, of course, at that time and now, a lot of people associate him with the autodestructive art period, but also, there are a lot of other things like his more kind of recent works from the 90s, the conferences, etc. So to see actual drawing and paintings was phenomenal, and to see the kind of connection as well between those works and see how they related to his later kind of move towards abstraction, and then later to his use of a palette knife rather than paintbrushes. It was, you could make such a clear connection once you saw the earlier work. So yeah, it was amazing.
And just to say that this retrieval and rediscovery of these works is also addressed in the catalogue, which will be accompanying the exhibition. Andrew Wilson, for one, discusses this process in his text. I can see he's listening as well. And also Matthew Copeland, who is interviewed by Ulla, the other co-director of the Gustav Metzger Foundation, discusses this exciting rediscovery of the works as well, and what that meant.
Fantastic, thank you, Nikki. And a question for you as well, Nicola. Are Gustav's thoughts on the struggle between the Jewish prohibition on depiction and creating art documented in writing or in recorded interviews? And that's a question coming from Sylvia Finzi. So thank you, Sylvia.
Well, Leanne, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would have thought both. I think it's definitely documented that he discussed these things with Brona Ferrin, who I mentioned in my introduction. And he may have also discussed that in audio interviews that he did with Clive Philpott. I don't know whether that is also the case. They can be listened to at the British Library. But yeah, as far as I know, it's a bit of an unexplored area generally. But yeah, she did discuss this. Brona did discuss this with Metzger, and it's something that I'm also going to be trying to draw out a bit more in my contribution to the catalogue that I mentioned will be accompanying the exhibition.
Yes, you used an interesting phrase in your talk about him sort of circling around his Jewishness, if I remember correctly. Did you want to add a little bit more on that, or?
I think it's an area to be explored, really, but yeah, I mean, one thing that could be mentioned is that it's interesting to draw attention to these early drawings that we think are probably from 1945 sort of period, a series in which he depicts what he said was his family kind of around a table, and one of his earliest memories of his mother bathing him, which obviously does relate both to his Jewish upbringing and this depiction of figures question, and in some are more abstract and others varying in sizes and styles. some are very figurative, some are more abstract with kind of blocky faces and no features. So yeah, that's something to sort of add into the discussion there as well, as the table paintings from 1956.
So that seems to be a very evocative, on one hand a simple image, but on the other standing for so many things, from this personal identity, Jewish identity, around the nuclear disarmament movement, and you both touched on a number of areas there. And interestingly, with Leanne talking about him working with wood, and I know he trained with sculptors, and you mentioned that desire to work with Henry Moore, Nikki, I think, in your talk. And that sort of seems to go right back to the beginning. I think one of you had mentioned before in writings that he would take refuge in the woods when he was still in Germany early on, and found, I guess, solace there. Do you think that also influenced this desire to work with wood, both in sort of carpentry and as a sculptor, and then in these very experimental ways?
Yeah.
Okay. There's another question for Nicola about whether Metzger is connected with Ben-Uri in any way. So would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, no, he does actually have a connection with Ben-Uri. Quite an interesting one. He exhibited what at that time, and I think may still be, though I'm not entirely sure of its dimensions, what was termed his biggest painting to date at Ben-Uri in 1948, in fact, in an exhibition of contemporary Jewish artists' work. And he said that Bomberg saw that exhibition and encouraged him to then exhibit the same work at the London Group exhibition later that year. And there the work was exhibited under the title Hospital Mural Womb Man. And that was apparently a triptych sort of piece painted on what was effectively a screen room divider in egg tempera, largely monochrome apparently. And so that was an initial connection. And then also in the Ben-Uri archive, I managed to find that there was a filled out membership application form from 1954. And he then subsequently gave a lecture, because I found the leaflet advertising it, with Jonathan Bentel in May 1964, called Auto-Destructive Art and Beyond. So yeah, there were a couple of engagements with Ben-Uri, which is interesting. So it's nice to bring his work back.
They seem to have been over these intervals, which is quite interesting, a number of years between each one.
Yeah, but I think this Womb Man painting was quite important for him. He describes it at the time as his best painting, and he felt that it really had harmony, and he was very proud of its position within the London Group exhibition in 1948 as well, because it was hung quite prominently.
It's interesting to see him taking part in something which for many artists was a sort of alternative progressive platform, but for Gustav Metzger it was maybe quite a conventional platform, because we associate him with these much more sort of diverse kind of happenings and events and so forth from the 60s onwards. But one forgets really that he did have a lot of conventional art training in the beginning. So he had various different aspects at art schools, didn't he? And Nicola, perhaps you can tell us also a little bit more about that relationship with Bomberg that you mentioned as being so important.
Yeah, well, I think the relationship to Bomberg was there sort of throughout his life, really. I mean, having started the classes in 45, he was immediately struck by Bomberg's presence and teaching, and obviously his style then reflected Bomberg's work in sort of often the thickness of the paint and the sort of attack on the surface. And though he did sort of part ways with Bomberg at various times throughout the 40s and 50s, he sort of went away and came back. He then became very close with him following his return from the trip abroad, which I mentioned in 1949 to 53. He was there almost twice a week attending classes. And then despite the break with Bomberg in 53, when Metzger resigned from the Bar group, it did actually say, I am resigning from the group, but I would still like to, be involved and work with you. He then received a letter that sort of cut ties with him almost completely at that point. But I mean, yeah.
Was that because Bomberg was offended at his leaving, or is there a specific reason that he gives for that breakup of that relationship? Oh, I think Nikki just frozen there for a second. Hopefully,
I should have seen frozen.
Come back to us.
Well, I can kind of answer that as well. Yeah. It doesn't seem like there was a specific reason given for their breakup, if you want to call it that. Just we have a letter basically from David Bomberg that is basically telling Gustav, sorry, but I don't want to see you again, sort of thing, in a less polite way. But no, Gustav didn't really want to discuss it, at least not with me, and I didn't press too hard. So maybe others have answers to that, but I don't have a clear reason actually why exactly
I guess they're both ties. Incredibly strong characters.
Very, yeah.
These kind of, breakups and discussions and so are very common in creative, not just artists, but musicians. But yes, and but obviously it was a very important relationship while it lasted. I think we've temporarily lost Nikki.
Yeah, we may have. Just to say though, I mean, about David Bomberg, yes, he did say repeatedly in writings and in speaking that yes, that was one of the most influential kind of relationships and people in his entire life and in the development of his artistic practice. We do have some really interesting works in the collection. Among those works we recovered in 2010, and those are works on paper that basically were works that Gustav had made that had then been corrected by David Bomberg, as he might have called it, in a kind of orange kind of pastel or marker, kind of showing him the way it should have been drawn. And so it's quite an interesting work, or a few of them are interesting works that obviously, are kind of contributed to by both. But that even shows you the kind of relationship they might have had. I mean, I wouldn't take it too lightly if someone corrected my work like that.
No, so, I think it was much more common in those days, though, wasn't it? It was part of art school.
That's right. Yeah.
To a certain extent, but yes, of course, not everybody would like to be corrected as such. And yeah, one could see that those relationships can become quite fraught. Just turning that part of the question back also to Sylvia's question about his Jewish identity. Do you think it was significant that these early supporters like Bomberg and Epstein were Jewish, or coincidental?
Well, that's an interesting question. I guess maybe a tiny bit of both in a sense, if that can be possible. I think probably mostly coincidental, but then at the same time, he's talked a lot, and he had talked a lot in his life about how Jewishness was a very big factor in his life. It was extremely important. It had shaped him as a boy, as a young man, as a grown-up, and so clearly that's not something he ever discarded. And I'm not sure, exactly how he formed those connections, and the kind of character of the people, I'm sure, came more into play than the actual fact that they might have been Jewish, but surely there might have been a connection as well based on that at that time.
Thank you. I think we have Nikki back, but perhaps not on sound. So if you are there, Nicola, and you'd like to say anything more on that question, then do please join us. okay. No, I think she's not quite back yet. And I mean, your long relationship with Gustav, Leanne, sounds so fascinating. I wondered if you had any particular sort of stories or memories that you wanted to share with people. I know there must be so many, but it sounds like he was such an inspiring person with so many ideas, and never sitting still and finishing, always carrying on with his work, his ambitions, and so on. And that in itself is quite extraordinary, given his long years with us, and the many things that he did. So I don't know if there's anything you would pick out.
Oh, there are so many moments and days and events, I'm sure. But one thing that always struck me was just literally the amount of energy that man had. I mean, obviously, when I met him, he was, I guess, around 80 years old. And I mean, he had more energy than I did. He was at every exhibition opening. I could just ask him, what exhibition should I go see this weekend? And he would have seen all of them. He'd open the guide from the Guardian and open the page, and he would have seen literally pretty much all of them. And he could describe, each and every artist. He kept up to date on everyone, whether it was a historical artist or a contemporary artist. He knew all their work. In fact, if they were contemporary artists or even someone from the 20th century, he probably had met them. So he had stories about each and every one. So it was fascinating how he kept it going. He, not only did he do his own work, he made the time to meet young people, like I mentioned, not just young people. I mean, people in general. He loved speaking to people, and he would always invite them over to his studio for a cup of tea or just to chat. But then, yes, he was just he loved art. He said that himself. He was a lover of art, but in particular beauty. So he really liked having kind of experiences of beauty, and so he would go, to Tate Britain or the National Gallery, and he would just go again and again and again and see his favorite works of art, and he could discuss it for hours. It was just incredible, the amount of knowledge, but also that amazing energy he had.
And was there a particular work, a favorite work that you'd like to just mention that he used to go back to? I mean, it's interesting that he would go to those sort of very traditional galleries, and I know other of his peers from his training, such as Auerbach and Kossoff, have also gone, consistently found so much inspiration at the National Gallery and often reinterpreted images and that type of thing. But it's not necessarily one thinks of with Gustav.
No, I would say that's true. But I'd say one of his favorite places in London, maybe the world, was Kenwood House. And he would go there as much as he could, less and less in his later years. But even then, he would take every opportunity he got to go there. I can't even pinpoint a specific work, but that was just one of his favorite places. I think part of it is, it's surrounded by nature, so it has that element. It had a great cafe, so he loved that element. But then also, yes, it was just filled with the most amazing works of art. And, a lot of them, of course, probably he would have pinpointed a lot of them that kind of inspired him or that he looked at. But he just really loved to look at art of all ages. One of the things that is probably quite little known as well about Gustav is during a period in the 80s when he lived in the Netherlands, specifically mostly in The Hague, he was so taken by Vermeer in his life that he went to Netherlands to study Vermeer more closely. He actually wrote a manuscript on Vermeer. So he spent 5 years researching and writing this manuscript. And unfortunately, he lost it at that time. We have recovered it since then, but we haven't. When I say recovered, we don't have it in our hands. It's still in The Hague, but we know where it is now. We just need to read it. But basically, he always wanted to publish that manuscript. And his love for Vermeer was also astounding, because when I met him, I never would have thought that would be the case with Gustav Metzger. But he had just such an eye for artists, and beauty in general, that he loved art by any means, basically.
I was thinking about that fantastic Rembrandt with the circles. I think that the self-portrait, that's at Kenwood, isn't it? I bet that would be one that would intrigue him. Nicola, it's lovely to have you back. We do have another question here from Sarah. think it's Sarah, can't see the whole name. Yes, so I think this must be to Leanne. Would you consider writing about your time with Gustav? It would be an insight into the man himself.
Well, she will be writing about that.
I've written a little bit here and there. And yes, and if you check out the catalog that comes out with this exhibition, you'll read a little bit more insight as well. I do happen to know that a biography of Gustav Metzger is in the making, not by me, but that will also be fascinating to read in the next few years. And that I'm sure will contain a lot of those kind of encounters and moments as well. But yes, you'll see me write over the years about my experiences with him now and again. Just watch out in different publications and you'll find it.
Thank you. And Nikki, perhaps you want to tell us a little bit more about those catalogue contributions from all your fantastic contributors, just to end on, and then we'll wrap up for the evening. Unless you wanted to come back on anything that you missed during your brief connection timeout.
Oh, I think she may be
I
frozen
think
again.
we may have lost her again.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I know that Nikki has got a fantastic array of catalogue contributors, including Andrew, who she said was Andrew Wilson, who had joined us tonight, including Dr. Lizzie Fisher, Matthew Copeland, Stephen Van, Leanne, and Nikki herself. So we will have a real range of pieces in the catalogue which will discuss all aspects of Gustav's career, although the exhibition will focus on these unknown early years.
Yeah.
So Leanne, would you like to add any closing words? Otherwise I will bring the evening to an end now, as we've gone a little bit over time.
Well, I would just say come to the exhibition. You'll see something surprising if you haven't seen these works before. Absolutely.
So I would like to echo that. Please come to the exhibition. So the diary date is, for your diaries, is the 16th of June for the actual getting through the doors, which is a great moment for us all, of course. 15th of June for an online private view, and do check out all of our online events. And don't forget to join us, please, for our next event with Karina Plath of the Sprengel Museum, which, as Nikki mentioned, will be on the 12th of May. So thank you all very much for joining in tonight and the fascinating discussion that we've had around this extraordinary figure. Oh, Nikki, you're there. Would you like to add anything before you...
I think we'll leave it there just in case I cut out again. Sorry,
Okay.
Don't know what's going on. But thank you everyone so much for joining us. And yeah, we hope you can join us for our next event in a couple of weeks' time, and also then come to the exhibition.
Okay, thank you. Good night, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Bye.